In a small American town that most people passed through without noticing, where the highway hummed day and night and seasons drifted by like half-forgotten songs, there lived a young woman named Rose Whitmore. She was 24, but her eyes carried a kind of tired grace, the sort that came from understanding too much too early. People often said Rose had the kind of smile that felt like an apology. Soft, gentle, slightly shaky. She worked at a local bookstore, one of the few places in town that still smelled of paper and stories, dusting shelves, brewing coffee for visitors, and pretending things were all right. But inside her chest lived a quiet storm. It wasn't sadness alone, nor fear alone, but a mix of both, something like grief for a life she wasn't sure she would have time to finish living. Rose had been diagnosed with a chronic heart condition when she was 18. Something rare, doctors said. Something that could be managed, but not cured. Something that dimmed the edges of possibility. Something that reminded her, every night, that tomorrow wasn't promised. But Rose lived softly, gently, moving through days as though they were fragile glass, careful not to break them. Until she met Kelvin Hale. Kelvin didn't enter her world softly. He arrived like reckless sunlight breaking through a winter window. He was 27, tall, thin in a thoughtful way, with a jawline that looked like someone carved it while daydreaming. He had messy black hair, warm brown eyes, and a kindness that didn't announce itself, it simply existed. He walked into the bookstore one rainy January afternoon, dripping water everywhere and apologizing with a laugh that startled Rose into looking up fully for the first time that day. "Sorry," he said, brushing rain from his jacket. "I didn't mean to flood your floor. The storm outside looks like it has personal issues." Rose blinked, then laughed, something she hadn't done honestly in days. "It's okay, the floor needed washing anyway." That was how it began, not with fireworks, but with a soaked jacket, a lopsided grin, and the kind of laugh that felt like a hand reaching out. Kelvin had just moved to town, he explained. He was a photographer, freelancing for magazines and traveling wherever assignments took him. But he needed a place to pause, he said. To breathe, to rethink his life. Rose understood that need more than she wanted to admit. He bought a book, something about star maps, and left with a smile that followed her long after the door closed. Kelvin returned the next day, and the next, and the next, sometimes to buy a book, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for no reason at all. Rose noticed how he asked questions, not the shallow kind, but questions that made her think he actually wanted to hear the answers. What makes you happy? What scares you? What do you dream about? What keeps you going? She avoided the last one. She always did. The truth was painful. What kept her going was fear of disappearing before she made any real memories. Kelvin had no idea. One evening, about a month after he first walked into the store, they stayed long after closing. The power had gone out from a storm, leaving them with only 2 candles and a small pool of golden light between them. "Do you ever feel," Kelvin said, leaning back against a bookshelf, "like you're made of borrowed time?" Rose's breath halted. He didn't know. He couldn't know, but he spoke like someone who had seen cracks in the world. "Sometimes," she whispered. Kelvin glanced at her with a softness that made her heart ache in a way unrelated to her illness. He nodded, as if hearing something he recognized. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." In that dim amber light, something settled between them, an understanding, a fragile connection, a thread pulled tight. They grew closer in ways neither expected. Walks by the river, late-night talks about constellations, coffee runs at dawn, quiet moments filled with laughter that felt like healing. Kelvin saw Rose as though she were a painting, and every detail mattered, her trembling fingers when she was tired, the freckles across her cheeks, the way she hesitated before saying something honest. But Rose, she tried not to fall. Because falling felt dangerous. Falling meant time mattered. Falling meant loss mattered. Falling meant he would one day find her gone. Yet love isn't a thing that asks permission. Sometimes it simply arrives, steady and unafraid. And so she loved him, quietly, deeply, desperately. Rose told no one about Kelvin. Not yet. Not when her mother visited. Not when her friends asked why she seemed happier. Not when her doctor raised his brows at her rising blood pressure. She feared what truth might ruin. Her condition was worsening. She knew the symptoms. The breathlessness, the occasional dizziness, the pain that felt like tiny stars collapsing behind her ribs. Sometimes she sat on the bookstore's bathroom floor, clutching her chest, whispering, "Not yet. Please, not yet." Kelvin didn't notice. She hid it well. She had spent 6 years becoming an expert in pretending things didn't hurt. But secrets are like shadows. They grow, and Kelvin loved her too much not to notice her fading. One night, as they sat on the hood of his car looking at the sky, Kelvin said quietly, "You always look like you're bracing for something." Rose froze. "I just worry a lot," she said. "About what?" "Everything." Kelvin turned to her fully. "Rose, please don't lie to me." His voice cracked, not with anger, but something gentler, sadder. She felt her throat close. She wasn't ready. She wanted more time, just a little. So she whispered, "Not tonight, Kelvin. Please." He said nothing more, but the ache in his silence followed her home. 3 weeks later, her secret broke. Rose collapsed at the bookstore. A sharp, stabbing pain. A fall against a bookshelf. A scream she didn't know was hers. When she woke, she was in a hospital bed. Her mother crying beside her. Doctors murmuring words she wished she didn't understand. A familiar voice rushed into the room. Kelvin. His eyes were wide, frightened, filled with questions he didn't know how to form. "Rose." He reached for her hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" Tears slipped from her eyes. She didn't know how to answer without breaking him. "It wasn't supposed to get this bad," she whispered. Kelvin shook his head. His voice trembled. "I would have stayed anyway. That's why I didn't tell you." And that, more than anything, was the truth. She didn't want to steal his future. She didn't want him tied to someone whose life might end too soon. She didn't want him to sacrifice what he had worked so hard for. But love sometimes chooses pain anyway. Kelvin didn't leave her side for the next 3 days. He held her hand when she trembled. He whispered stories about constellations and adventures and places he wanted to take her. He kissed her forehead when she fell asleep. But he also cried when he thought she couldn't hear him. She always heard. Rose's condition stabilized, at least for the moment. She was discharged with medication, restrictions, and a future trembling at the edges. Kelvin drove her home, but before they reached her street, he pulled over at a small hill overlooking town, a place they'd never been before. He turned to her. "Rose, I love you." Her breath caught. "I know your life is complicated," he continued. "I know you're scared, but I want to be here. Even if time is short. Even if things hurt, I'm not going anywhere." Rose swallowed, tears blurring her vision. It felt like something inside her cracked open, like a star bursting. "I love you too," she whispered. Kelvin leaned forward, his forehead against hers. Two souls trembling in the dark. Then he wrapped his arms around her, an embrace full of fear, hope, grief, devotion, and something like surrender. It was the first time Rose felt safe in months, maybe years. For a while, things were good, achingly, startlingly good. Kelvin moved into her mother's old guest house to be near her. Rose continued working at the bookstore, slower now, but still with a soft determination. They made lists of things they wanted to do together. 1. Visit the ocean. 2. Take photos under a sky full of stars. 3. Watch fireflies in the summer. 4. Share a sunrise without talking, just breathing together. They did all of them. Kelvin photographed Rose endlessly, laughing, crying, tired, alive. He said her face carried every emotion the human heart could hold. Rose felt guilty sometimes, for borrowing his time, for becoming part of his story when hers felt unfinished. But Kelvin would hold her face in his hands and whisper, "You are worth every second." And somehow, she believed him. Their love became a refuge, a small shelter from the storm, a place where both of them could breathe. But storms return, they always do. It happened in early autumn. They had driven out to a rural field to watch a meteor shower, something Kelvin had planned for weeks. He brought blankets, hot chocolate, a camera, and the kind of excited smile Rose adored. "You'll love this," he said. "It's like watching the sky fall apart and heal at the same time." Rose giggled softly. "You always say dramatic things about stars. Because they're dramatic, they burn, collapse, explode, but we still call them beautiful." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Like us." Kelvin kissed the top of her head. "Exactly like us." They lay there under the velvet sky, watching streaks of light tear across the darkness. But something felt wrong. Rose's chest tightened, Not the gentle ache she was used to, but a deep, suffocating pressure. Her breath stuttered. Calvin noticed instantly. Rose, hey, what's wrong? She couldn't speak. Her vision blurred. Her hands shook. Calvin's panic rose like a wave. He lifted her gently, whispering her name again and again, begging her to stay awake. But her eyes were closing. Not because she wanted them to, but because her body was tired of fighting. Stay with me, Calvin whispered, voice cracking. Rose, please. She tried to answer, tried to tell him she loved him, tried to stay, but the world dimmed, edges softening, sounds fading. The last thing she felt was Calvin's arms around her, warm, desperate, unbroken. An embrace full of fear and love. Then everything slipped into silence. Rose survived, but only barely. She woke in the hospital, machines beeping like distant heartbeat echoes. Calvin sat beside her, face pale, hair messy, eyes swollen. He had been crying. You came back, he whispered. Rose tried to smile, but tears fell instead. Calvin, I'm so sorry. No, he said quickly. Don't apologize. Don't ever apologize for being alive. The doctors told him the truth soon after. Rose would need surgery, dangerous, difficult, uncertain. Without it, her condition would worsen quickly. With it, she had a chance, but no guarantees. Calvin held her hand through every word. When the doctors left, Rose whispered, I don't want you to lose your life because of mine. Calvin's voice trembled. Rose, loving you isn't losing anything. It's the only thing that makes sense. Her heart broke in a different way then, not from illness, but from love too big for her small, fragile body. The days before surgery passed like slow rain. Calvin stayed in the hospital with her, slept in a chair, read to her, held her hand when she cried, pulled her close when nightmares came. One night, when the hallway lights flickered and the world felt far away, Rose said, if something happens to me, you have to promise to keep living. Calvin shook his head sharply. No, don't talk like that, Calvin. No, he repeated, voice breaking. I can't promise that. Rose lifted a trembling hand to his cheek. You must. Tears pooled in his eyes. I don't know how. You learn, she whispered. The way I learned to love you. Calvin leaned into her touch, shaking with silent sobs. The power of their embrace in that moment held every emotion a human heart could endure. Love so deep it bled, fear so sharp it cut, hope so fragile it trembled. And pain, always pain. The surgery was scheduled for dawn. Calvin walked with Rose down the quiet hallway until the doors where he had to stop. He held her tightly, an embrace full of everything unsaid. Come back to me, he whispered. Rose nodded, tears slipping silently. I'll try. Their foreheads touched for a long, trembling moment. Then she was taken inside, and Calvin broke. He slid down the hospital wall, hands covering his face, shaking like the world was ending. Maybe, in a way, it was. Hours passed, long hours, merciless hours. Then the doctor approached. Calvin stood so quickly he almost fell. Please, he whispered, please just tell me. The doctor's face held a complex, fragile softness. She made it through, the doctor said gently. The surgery was successful, but recovery will be very slow, and she'll need careful monitoring. There's still risk, but she's here. Calvin's knees weakened. He cried, loud, unrestrained, relieved, broken. She was alive, alive. When he finally saw her, she was pale, tired, hooked to more machines than before, but she was breathing. She opened her eyes slowly. Calvin took her hand, pressing it to his lips. You came back, he whispered. Rose smiled faintly, weak, but real. I told you I would try. Calvin rested his head beside her hand, tears soaking the sheets. They stayed like that for a long time. Two souls bruised but unbroken. The stars were flawed, yes. Lives were fragile. Time was cruel. Pain was inevitable. But love was the thing that survived. Their story wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. It wasn't endless. But it was theirs. A reflection of love, sacrifice, pain, and the power of embrace. A story written not in constellations, but in hearts learning to beat again. And sometimes, that was enough.